Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Glenn Edward Rogers was born on July 15, 1962, in the small city of Hamilton, Ohio. He was the fourth of 7 children born to Claude and Edna Rogers. His father worked as a hydropulp operator at the local Champion paper factory. This was a steady job, but it did not provide much extra money for such a large family. They lived in a working-class neighborhood where many families struggled financially. From a young age, Glenn had difficulties in school. He often got into fights with other children and did not pay attention to his teachers. He was frequently in trouble for small acts of disobedience and theft. By the time he was a teenager, his problems became more serious. He was expelled from junior high school before he turned 16 for consistent bad behavior. After his expulsion, he did not return to any form of education. As a teenager, Glenn began spending most of his time on the streets. He started drinking alcohol and getting into more fights. When he was still a teenager, he began a relationship with a 14-year-old girl named Deborah and Nix. She soon became pregnant. Because of this, Glenn and Deborah got married. They had their first child together while they were both very young. A second child was born in 1981. The marriage was not a happy one. Deborah later said that Glenn was physically abusive toward her. She stated he had a very bad temper and would hit her during arguments. In 1983, Deborah filed for divorce. The reason she gave to the court was physical abuse by Glenn. After his divorce, Glenn Rogers moved from job to job. He worked for short periods as a painter, a roofer, and a general laborer. He never kept a job for long. He often quit or was fired for not showing up or for arguing with his bosses. He began traveling more, leaving Ohio for weeks at a time. He would take odd jobs in other states, but always returned to Hamilton with no money. During this time, his family noticed he was becoming more secretive and angry. He would borrow money from relatives and never pay it back. He began stealing things from family members, including tools and jewelry. He also started getting into legal trouble in Ohio. He was arrested several times for small crimes like public drunkenness, disorderly conduct, and petty theft. These arrests resulted in fines or short stays in jail. In his late 20s, Glenn's behavior became more concerning. He developed a pattern of forming quick friendships with older, lonely men who lived alone. He would offer to do handyman work for them in exchange for a place to stay. After a short time, these men would often report that money or valuable items were missing, and Glenn would disappear. One such man was a 71-year-old retired electrician and veteran named Mark Peters. In October of 1993, Peters allowed Glenn to live with him in Hamilton. Shortly after, Mark Peters was reported missing. His car, along with his collection of antique guns and valuable coins, was also gone. Glenn Rogers had also disappeared from Hamilton at the same time. The police were told about the connection between the missing man and Glenn Rogers. In January 1994, Glenn's own brother, Clay Rogers, led the police to a family cabin in Beattyville, Kentucky. The brother suspected Glenn might have hidden something there. Inside the cabin, police found Mark Peters' car and some of his stolen property. They did not find Mark Peters himself at that time. Glenn Rogers was now a wanted man for theft and questioning about a missing person. He did not return to Ohio. After leaving Ohio, Glenn Rogers drove west to California. He arrived in the Van Nuys area of Los Angeles in September 1995. He used aliases and did not keep a regular job. He spent his days in bars, offering to buy drinks for women. On the evening of September 28, 1995, he was at a bar called McCred's. There, he met a 33-year-old woman named Sandra Gallagher. She was a mother of 3 who was out for the evening. Witnesses saw them talking and drinking together. Later, they left the bar together. The next day, Sandra Gallagher's body was found in her pickup truck, which was parked near Rogers's apartment. She had been strangled to death. After killing her, Rogers had set the truck's interior on fire, likely to destroy evidence. He then took her wallet and other personal items. Following this murder, Rogers immediately left California. He drove east, using money he had taken from his victims. His pattern was to travel to a new state, find a cheap place to live, and then visit local bars. In late October 1995, he was in Jackson, Mississippi. He went to the Mississippi State Fair. At a beer tent there, he met a 34-year-old single mother named Linda Price. She was with her sister, Kathy Carroll. Linda was attracted to Rogers and commented on his appearance. Rogers was friendly and charming. He and Linda Price began a quick relationship, and she allowed him to stay at her apartment. On October 30th, Linda's sister Kathy saw her for the last time. The next day, which was Halloween, Kathy went to Linda's apartment so their children could go trick-or-treating together. No one answered the door. Kathy found this strange. Later, the apartment manager opened the door. Inside, they discovered Linda Price's body in the bathtub. She had been stabbed. Glenn Rogers and Linda Price's car were gone. Rogers drove from Mississippi to Florida. He arrived in the Tampa Bay area in early November. On November 5th, 1995, he went to a bar called the Showtown Bar in Gibsonton. He bought drinks for a woman named Tina Marie Cribbs and her friends. Tina Cribbs was 34 years old. Later, Rogers asked Cribbs for a ride. She agreed. They left the bar together in her car, a white Ford Festiva. Rogers had already rented a room at the Tampa 8 Inn Motel. He paid for an extra night and told the front desk clerk not to clean his room. He and Cribbs went to this room. 2 days later, on November 7th, a motel cleaner entered the room after Rogers failed to check out. She found Tina Cribbs's body in the bathtub. She had been stabbed in the chest. Rogers was gone. He had taken Tina Cribbs's car, her wallet, and her other belongings. He drove north through Florida. He threw Cribbs's wallet out of the car window at a rest area. Police later found it there. From Florida, Rogers drove west into Louisiana. He went to Bossier City. He knew a woman there named Andy Giles Sutton. It is not clear how they met, but they were acquaintances. On November 9th, 1995, someone entered Andy Sutton's apartment. She was attacked and killed with a knife. Her body was found on her waterbed. There were signs of a struggle. Valuable items were missing from the home. Neighbors reported seeing a man matching Rogers's description, leaving the apartment building around that time. Rogers now had a car, money, and items taken from several victims. He decided to drive north, likely to return to Kentucky or Ohio. He was driving Tina Cribbs's white Ford Festiva. On November 13th, 1995, he was driving on a highway in Waco, Kentucky. A Kentucky State Police detective named Bob Stevens saw the car. The car matched the description of a vehicle wanted in connection with a Florida homicide. Detective Stevens began to follow the car. He tried to pull it over. Instead of stopping, Rogers sped up. A police chase began. Other officers joined the chase. It lasted for 13 miles. A police sergeant used his car to bump the back of Rogers's car, forcing it to spin off the road into a ditch. Police officers surrounded the car with their guns drawn. They ordered the driver out. Glenn Rogers was arrested at the scene. A local news crew filmed the end of the chase and the arrest. After his arrest in Kentucky, Glenn Rogers was taken to a local police station. The police first identified him using fingerprints. They then connected him to the white Ford Festiva he was driving. They ran the car's license plate and found it was registered to Tina Marie Cribbs of Florida, who had been reported missing. The Florida police were contacted. They confirmed that Cribbs had been found murdered in a Tampa motel room. Fingerprints from that motel room were a match for Glenn Rogers. This gave the police solid evidence to hold him for the murder in Florida. The investigation grew as police from different states shared information. The police in Los Angeles, California, learned about the arrest. They sent the fingerprints from the Sandra Gallagher murder case. Those fingerprints also matched Rogers. Police in Jackson, Mississippi, and Bossier City, Louisiana, did the same with their unsolved murder cases involving Linda Price and Andy Sutton. In each case, the method was similar. The women were killed in their homes or motel rooms, often in bathrooms, and their valuables and cars were stolen. Rogers became the main suspect in all these murders. Because the strongest physical evidence was in Florida, Rogers was first sent to Tampa to stand trial for the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs. The trial began in 1997. The prosecution showed the jury several key pieces of evidence. This included his fingerprints in the motel room and on Cribbs's wallet, the fact he was caught driving her car, and witness testimony from the bar and the motel clerk. The defense argued that Cribbs was alive when Rogers left the motel. The jury did not believe this. On July 11, 1997, they found Glenn Rogers guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to death by execution. Next, Rogers was sent to California to stand trial for the murder of Sandra Gallagher. That trial happened in 1999. Again, evidence included fingerprints and witness testimony from people who saw him with Gallagher at the bar. The jury in California also found him guilty of first-degree murder. On July 16, 1999, he received a second death sentence. Glenn Rogers was then placed on death row at the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. For many years, his lawyers filed appeals. An appeal is a request for a higher court to review the case. The lawyers argued about the evidence and the trial procedures. They also argued that Rogers had a difficult childhood. All of these appeals were denied by various courts, including the Florida Supreme Court and federal courts. On April 15, 2025, the governor of Florida signed a death warrant. This is an official order that sets a date for an execution. Glenn Rogers' execution was scheduled for May 15, 2025. His lawyers made final, urgent appeals to stop the execution. They filed requests with the Florida Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court. Both courts quickly denied these last appeals. On the afternoon of May 15, 2025, Rogers was prepared for his execution by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. He was given a final meal of pizza, chocolate cake, and soda. Before the injection, he was allowed to give a final statement. He spoke to the families of his victims, saying they would get answers soon. He also made a statement supporting a former president. The lethal injection was then administered. A doctor declared him dead at 6:16 p.m. After the execution, some family members of his victims spoke to the media. Sandra Gallagher's sister said she could finally feel at peace and safe knowing Rogers could not hurt anyone else. Linda Price's sister said the execution provided closure, but expressed anger that Rogers never showed real remorse. Andy Sutton's son said the death seemed too peaceful for someone who had committed such violent crimes. Over the years, Rogers had also claimed he was involved in other famous murders, but law enforcement officials thoroughly investigated these claims and dismissed them. They stated the evidence for his convicted crimes was solid, and his other claims were not credible. The case was closed for the families of Sandra Gallagher, Tina Marie Cribbs, and the other victims he was suspected of killing. The story of Glenn Rogers ended with his execution on May 15, 2025. Story 2. Charles Ray Hatcher was born on July 16, 1929, in a small town called Mound City, Missouri. He was the youngest of 4 children. His father, Jesse, made and sold illegal alcohol. Jesse was often violent when he drank and had been in prison. He was abusive to his family. Charles's mother's name was Lula. When Charles was about 6 years old, a very bad accident happened. He was playing with his older brothers near an old car. They found some copper wire. His oldest brother, Arthur, picked up the wire. The wire touched a high-power electrical line. Arthur was electrocuted and died. This happened in the spring of 1936. A few years after Arthur died, Charles's father left the family. His parents got a divorce. Charles's mother married again several times. In 1945, when Charles was a teenager, he moved with his mother and her new husband to the city of St. Joseph, Missouri. Charles did not do well in school. Other children bullied him. He also began to bully other children. He carried this mean behavior into his adult life. When he was 18 years old, in 1947, he got his first job at a walnut company. He only worked there for 2 weeks. He stole a logging truck from the company. He was caught and convicted of auto theft. The court gave him a 2-year suspended sentence. This meant he did not go to prison that time, but he was on warning. In 1948, he stole another car, a Buick in St. Joseph. This time, he was sent to the Missouri State Penitentiary for 2 years. He was released from prison in June 1949, after serving a little more than 1 year. A few months after his release, he committed another crime. He wrote a fake check for $10 at a gas station in Maryville, Missouri. He was convicted of forgery and sent back to prison. In March 1951, he tried to escape from prison. He was caught while attempting a burglary. For the escape attempt, 2 more years were added to his prison sentence. He was released again in July 1954. Very soon after, he stole a Ford car in Orick, Missouri. He was caught and sentenced to 4 years in prison. Before he could be moved to prison from the local jail, he tried to escape from that jail too. For this second escape attempt, he received another 2-year sentence. He was finally released from prison in March 1959. In June 1959, he tried to abduct a 16-year-old boy named Stephen Pelham in St. Joseph. Stephen was a newspaper delivery boy. Hatcher threatened the boy with a butcher knife. Stephen got away and reported the crime to the police. The police later stopped Hatcher while he was driving a stolen car. He was arrested for the attempted abduction and for auto theft. Because he had so many prior convictions, he was sentenced under a habitual criminal law. He received a 5-year sentence at the Missouri State Penitentiary. While waiting in the local jail to be taken to prison, he tried to break out but failed. When he arrived at the state prison, he boasted that he was the most famous criminal in the area since the outlaw Jesse James. In July 1961, while working in the prison kitchen, another inmate named Jerry Tharrington was killed. The man was found raped and stabbed. At the time of the murder, Hatcher was the only kitchen worker missing. The prison authorities put Hatcher in solitary confinement for this murder. However, there was not enough proof for a court trial, so he was never formally charged for it. While locked in solitary confinement, Hatcher wrote a note saying he needed to see a mental doctor. The prison psychologist thought Hatcher was only pretending to be mentally ill. The psychologist believed this was a trick to get out of solitary confinement and maybe get out of prison early. The prison did not give him the treatment. He was let out of solitary and put back with the other prisoners. His sentence was reduced, and he was released from prison on August 24, 1963. After his release from prison in 1963, Charles Hatcher moved to California. On August 27, 1969, he abducted a 12-year-old boy named William Freeman in Antioch, California. Hatcher later confessed that he told the boy to come with him. He took William to a creek and strangled him to death. 2 days later, on August 29, 1969, in San Francisco, Hatcher approached a 6-year-old boy named Gilbert Martinez. Gilbert was playing with a little girl. Hatcher offered Gilbert ice cream. The boy went with him. Hatcher took Gilbert to a secluded area, beat him, and sexually assaulted him. A man walking his dog found them and called the police. The police arrived and arrested Hatcher. During this arrest, he gave a fake name, Albert Ralph Price. Gilbert Martinez survived the attack. When charged with kidnapping and assault, Hatcher began to act strangely. He pretended to hear voices. He faked suicide attempts and pretended to have mental problems. He did this to avoid being sent to prison. He was sent to a state hospital for evaluations. Doctors there thought he was exaggerating or faking his mental illness. One doctor diagnosed him with conditions that involved a sexual attraction to children. Another doctor declared him legally insane. In May 1971, he was finally sent to trial. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He was sent to a different hospital for more tests. On June 2, 1971, he escaped from this hospital. He was caught a week later in Colusa, California, driving a stolen car under another fake name, Richard Lee Grady. He was taken back to a state hospital. By April 1972, hospital staff decided his treatment was not working. They said he was a danger to other patients. He was moved to a prison hospital in Vacaville. In August 1972, he was transferred to San Quentin Prison to finally stand trial for the attack on Gilbert Martinez. New doctors examined him. One said he was competent for trial. Another said he was sane at the time of the crime. In December 1972, he was convicted of kidnapping and molesting Gilbert Martinez. In January 1973, he was sent to a state hospital as a mentally disordered sexual offender. In March 1973, guards found him hiding in a hospital cooler with sheets stuffed in his pants. He admitted he was trying to escape. Doctors then said he was still a threat to society. In April 1973, a court sentenced him to 1 year to life in prison. He was sent to a medium-security prison. In prison, a psychologist said Hatcher was a manipulative sociopath who knew how to work the prison system. In June 1973, he cut his wrists after hearing he might be sent to a tougher prison. A psychiatrist then diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. He stayed at the medium-security facility. By 1976, the parole board said he had improved. They set a parole date for late 1978. Because of a new law giving credit for time spent in hospitals, his release date was moved up. He was let out of prison and sent to a halfway house in San Francisco on May 20, 1977. On September 4, 1978, now in Omaha, Nebraska, and using the name Richard Clark, he sexually assaulted a 16-year-old boy. He was sent to a mental hospital in Nebraska and was released in January 1979. On May 3, 1979, he tried to stab a 7-year-old boy named Thomas Morton. He was arrested for attempted murder. The charges were later dropped, and he was sent to a mental health facility called Norfolk Regional Center. He was released in May 1980, but was sent back to the facility 2 months later for another assault. In September 1980, he escaped from this facility. On October 9, 1980, in Lincoln, Nebraska, he was arrested again as Richard Clark for trying to assault a 17-year-old boy. He was sent to another mental health facility and released after 21 days. On January 13, 1981, in Des Moines, Iowa, he was arrested after a knife fight. He spent time in more mental facilities. He was released to a shelter in Davenport, Iowa, in April 1981. During this time, a terrible crime had happened in his old home area. On May 26, 1978, a 4-year-old boy named Eric Christgen disappeared from downtown St. Joseph, Missouri. His body was later found by the Missouri River. He had been sexually abused and had suffocated. The police questioned many people, including a man named Melvin Reynolds. Melvin Reynolds had a low IQ and was easily pressured. After very long police interviews, Reynolds finally said, "I'll say so if you want me to." He confessed to a crime he did not commit. He was convicted of murder and sent to prison for life. Meanwhile, on July 29, 1982, back in St. Joseph, an 11-year-old girl named Michelle Steele went missing. The next day, her uncle found her body on a bank of the Missouri River. She had been beaten and strangled. The day after the body was found, Charles Hatcher tried to check himself into the St. Joseph State Hospital. The police were looking for anyone acting suspiciously. They arrested Hatcher at the hospital. After his arrest at the hospital, Charles Hatcher was questioned by the police about the murder of Michelle Steele. During this questioning, Hatcher began to confess to many other crimes. He told the police he had killed a total of 16 people. He said his first murder was William Freeman, the 12-year-old boy from Antioch, California, in 1969. He also gave details about other killings. One of the murders he confessed to was the killing of Eric Christgen, the 4-year-old boy from St. Joseph in 1978. Another man, Melvin Reynolds, was already in prison for that crime. Hatcher knew specific details about Eric Christen's death that only the killer would know. This made the police and the FBI believe his confession was real. Hatcher also confessed to killing a 28-year-old man named James Churchill. He said he buried the body on the grounds of the Rock Island Army Arsenal near Davenport, Iowa. He drew a rough map for the police. Investigators used this map to search the area. They found human remains there. The remains were identified as James Churchill. Because of Hatcher's detailed confessions, the authorities in Missouri realized Melvin Reynolds was innocent. They began the process to free him. Reynolds had been in prison for 4 years for a murder he did not commit. He was released from prison. The police and the FBI worked to check Hatcher's other confessions. They matched his stories to several unsolved murders of children and young men in different states. They found his crimes followed a pattern. He would often abduct a victim, sexually assault them, and then strangle them. He moved frequently and used fake names, which made it hard for police in different cities to connect the crimes. In Missouri, Hatcher was first put on trial for the murder of Eric Christgen. The trial happened in October 1983. The main evidence was his own detailed confession. He was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 50 years. Next, he was put on trial for the murder of Michelle Steele. This trial was in late 1984. Again, his confession was strong evidence. During this trial, Hatcher did not want a life sentence. He asked the jury to give him the death penalty. The jury considered his request but refused. On December 3, 1984, the jury recommended a sentence of life in prison for this murder as well. After the trial, Hatcher was sent back to the Missouri State Penitentiary. He was placed in a solitary confinement cell. 4 days later, on December 7, 1984, a guard found Hatcher dead in his cell. He had used a piece of electrical wire to hang himself from the bars of his cell door. He was 55 years old. After his death, the investigations into his other confessions continued. Law enforcement officially linked him to at least 5 murders, including those of William Freeman, Eric Christgen, James Churchill, and Michelle Steele. Many of his other confessions could not be fully proven because of a lack of physical evidence or specific details. Melvin Reynolds, the wrongfully convicted man, was fully cleared and set free. He received a pardon from the state. The families of the victims knew the real killer was dead, but this did not bring their children back. The story of Charles Hatcher showed how a dangerous person could manipulate the mental health and prison systems to get released, only to commit more crimes. His death brought a final end to his long history of violence. Story 3. Larry William Eiler was born on December 21st, 1952, in Crawfordsville, Indiana. He was the youngest of 4 children. His father was an alcoholic who was abusive to his wife and children. Larry's parents divorced when he was very young. After the divorce, Larry's mother struggled to support her children. She worked several jobs. Sometimes Larry and his sister were placed with foster families or babysitters because their mother could not care for them. Other times, they were left in the care of their older siblings, who were children themselves. Their mother often visited them when they were in foster care, and Larry later said these visits made the family feel closer. Larry's mother remarried several times. Her second and third husbands also drank heavily and were abusive. One stepfather disciplined Larry by holding his head under very hot water. This made Larry's childhood unstable and frightening. Larry attended school in Lebanon, Indiana. He was tall and played sports, but other children bullied him. They bullied him because his family was poor and his parents were divorced. His sister often had to protect him from these bullies. Teachers saw Larry as a quiet student who had few friends. As he got older, he became more stubborn and his behavior was unpredictable. Because of his difficult behavior, Larry's mother sent him to a home for boys who were hard to manage. Larry was very upset by this. He cried and begged his mother to let him come home. After a few weeks, she let him return. Soon after, he took some psychological tests. The tests showed he was of average intelligence, but had severe insecurity. He had an extreme fear of being abandoned or left alone. The people who gave the tests believed these fears came from his unstable home life. They recommended he stay at a Catholic boys' home in Fort Wayne for a while. He lived there for 6 months before going back to his mother. When Larry became a teenager, he realized he was homosexual. He told his family, but no one else. He felt deep shame and hated himself for being gay. In high school, he sometimes went on dates with girls, but these relationships never became physical. Larry had been somewhat religious since he was a child, and he told a few close friends that he struggled to accept his sexuality. Larry did not try very hard in school. He failed to graduate from high school, though he later earned a general education diploma. After leaving school, he got a job as a security guard at a hospital. He worked there for 6 months before losing the job. He then found work in a shoe store. While working there, he started visiting gay bars in Indianapolis. He began having casual sexual encounters with men he met. Some of these men noted that during sex, Larry would avoid looking at them and would shout insults. This made some think he was imagining his partner was a woman. By the mid-1970s, Larry was known in Indianapolis's gay community, especially among people interested in leather and bondage. Some people described him as a good-looking, relaxed man who liked bodybuilding and was close to his mother and sister. But other people who had sex with him described a different side. They said he had a sadistic streak and a violent temper that only came out during sexual encounters. These encounters often involved him beating his partner and cutting them lightly with a knife, usually on the torso. Larry worked mostly as a house painter. He never served in the military, but he often wore Marine Corps t-shirts. He lived in Terre Haute with a 38-year-old man named Robert David Little, who was a professor. Larry had met Little in 1974. Their relationship was not romantic. Larry saw Little as a father figure. Little was socially awkward and had trouble making friends. The two men went to gay bars together. Because Little had trouble finding partners, Larry would sometimes bring young men back to Little's home for sex with both of them. On August 3, 1978, Larry picked up a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Craig Long. Soon after the young man got into Larry's truck, Larry made a sexual advance. Craig tried to get out. Larry held a knife to Craig's chest. Craig said, "I don't have any money." Larry drove to a rural field and said, "It's not your money I want." He then ordered Craig to undress. Larry handcuffed him, tied his ankles, and told him to get in the back of the truck. When Craig tried to run away, Larry chased him. Craig shouted, "You queer!" In response, Larry stabbed him once in the chest. The stab wound punctured Craig's lung. Craig fell to the ground and pretended to be dead. After Larry left, Craig stumbled to a nearby house for help. Larry drove to the same house while Craig was getting first aid. He gave a sheriff's deputy the key to the handcuffs and claimed he had stabbed the young man by accident. Larry was arrested. Police searched his truck and found a hunting knife, a whip, another knife, more handcuffs, tear gas, and a sword. Larry was charged with aggravated battery. He first said he was guilty. A judge set his bail at $10,000. Friends helped him pay the bail, and he was released. Later, Larry's lawyers offered Craig Long $2,500 from Robert Little if he agreed not to press charges. Craig accepted the money. Larry then changed his plea to not guilty. On November 13th, he was found not guilty and only had to pay $43 in court costs. In August 1981, Larry began a long-term relationship with a married man named John Dobrovolskis, who was 20 years old. John lived in Chicago with his wife, Sally, and their children. Sally knew her husband was gay and was tolerant of his relationship with Larry. Larry often stayed with them during the week and paid part of the rent. Both Larry and John were interested in sadomasochism. Their sexual activities often involved Larry tying John up, beating him, and shouting curses at him before they had sex. Although they both sometimes saw other people, they considered their relationship to be permanent. However, Larry often accused John of being unfaithful. These arguments sometimes became physical, with John hitting Larry. Larry never hit John back. Robert Little disliked John and often made negative comments about him to Larry, which caused more arguments. Larry worked mainly as a house painter in Illinois during the week. On Saturdays, he worked at a liquor store in Greencastle, Indiana. Because of his two jobs, he traveled often between Illinois and Indiana. On weekends, he lived for free at Robert Little's house in Terre Haute. Larry Eiler's violent behavior escalated beyond the 1978 attack. Beginning in October 1982, he started to kill. His victims were teenage boys and young men. He would typically lure them with offers of drugs, alcohol, money, or a ride. He chose victims who were hitchhiking or looked vulnerable. His method was similar each time. He would pick up a young man and drive to a remote area. He often gave the victim alcohol mixed with strong sedatives to make them drowsy and easier to control. He would then overpower them. He used handcuffs or ropes to tie their wrists and ankles. He would often beat and whip his victims before killing them. He killed them by stabbing them many times with a knife. The wounds were usually focused on the chest and abdomen. After the killing, he would take the victim's shirt and wallet. He would often pull the victim's pants and underwear down to their ankles. He then left the body in a field close to a major highway. On October 12, 1982, he lured a 21-year-old man named Craig Townsend into his vehicle in Crown Point, Indiana. He drugged and beat him, then left him naked and unconscious in a rural field. Townsend survived the attack but suffered from exposure. 11 days later, on October 23rd, Eiler killed his first confirmed murder victim. He abducted and murdered a 19-year-old named Stephen Crockett. Crockett's body was found in a cornfield in Kankakee County, Illinois, about 12 hours after he was killed. An autopsy showed he had been beaten and stabbed 32 times. On October 30th, a 26-year-old named Edgar Underkoffler disappeared from Rantoul, Illinois. His body was found months later in a field near Danville, Illinois. In November 1982, Eiler killed a 25-year-old bartender named John Johnson. His body was found in Lowell, Indiana, a month later. On November 20th, he picked up a 19-year-old hitchhiker named William Lewis near Vincennes, Indiana. He stabbed him to death and buried the body in a field near Rensselaer, Indiana. On December 19th, 1982, Eiler abducted a 23-year-old named Stephen Agon in Terre Haute. Agon's body was discovered in nearby woods on December 28th. The killing was very violent. Investigators found specks of human flesh on the walls of an abandoned shed near the body. They believed Agon had been tied against the wall while he was attacked. The coroner noted the killer showed tremendous rage. The very next day, the body of a 21-year-old named John Roach was found in a field near an interstate in Putnam County. The coroner saw the same kind of brutal stab wounds and mutilation, suggesting the same killer. On December 30th, a 22-year-old named David Block disappeared from Highland Park, Illinois. His body was found in a field in May 1984. The killings continued into 1983. On January 24th, Eiler abducted and murdered a 16-year-old named Irvin Gibson in Lake County, Illinois. His body was found in April, lying on top of a dog that had also been stabbed. Between March and April, Eiler is believed to have killed at least 5 more young men. On May 9th, the body of 21-year-old Daniel McNeve was found in a field in Hendricks County, Indiana. He had been stabbed multiple times in the neck, back, and abdomen. One wound was so deep it caused his intestine to come out. There were marks on his wrists and ankles from being tied, and his jeans were around his ankles. 9 days later, on May 18th, Eiler killed a 25-year-old named Richard Bruce in Effingham, Illinois. He threw Bruce's body off a bridge into a creek. It was not found until December. By early 1983, police in Indiana noticed a pattern in several murders of young men. On May 15th, detectives from different jurisdictions held a meeting. They agreed the same person was likely responsible for multiple murders. They formed a united task force called the Central Indiana Multi-Agency Investigation Team, CIMATE. This group shared all information. They contacted other states to see if there were similar murders. Soon, police in Kentucky reported a 29-year-old victim named Jay Reynolds, found stabbed in March 1983. Police in Chicago reported an 18-year-old named Jimmy Roberts, found with 35 stab wounds in May 1983. Both were added to the investigation. The task force began calling the unknown killer the highway murderer. On June 6th, a former lover of Larry Eiler named Thomas Henderson called the task force's tip line. He said Larry Eiler might be the killer. He told police that Eiler had been charged with stabbing a hitchhiker in 1978, had a violent temper, liked bondage, worked at a liquor store in Greencastle on Saturdays, and lived with an older man in Terre Haute on weekends. He also said that in May 1982, Eiler had drugged a 14-year-old boy and left him unconscious in the woods. The boy was not assaulted, and police thought Eiler might have been testing how well the drugs worked. Police did a background check and found Eiler's 1978 arrest record. The way he had handcuffed and tied that victim matched the pattern seen on the murdered boys. They also learned Eiler traveled often between Indianapolis and Chicago. This made him a strong person of interest. They decided to watch him informally, but did not have enough for full surveillance or an arrest. The task force asked the FBI for a psychological profile of the killer. The FBI predicted the killer was a white man in his late 20s or early 30s. He would have a job requiring little skill, and would try to act very masculine to hide his shame about being attracted to men. He might hate homosexuals publicly. The killer would be physically strong, as the victims had deep marks from struggling against restraints. The FBI also thought the killer might have a slightly older, more intelligent accomplice. Eiler continued killing. On July 2nd, 1983, the body of an unidentified Hispanic man was found in a field in Ford County, Illinois. He had been stabbed many times. On August 31st, the body of a 28-year-old named Ralph Calise was found near a tollway in Lake County, Illinois. He had been stabbed 17 times. Some wounds were so deep his intestines were coming out. Lake County police linked this murder to 2 earlier killings in their area. A Chicago reporter named Geralyn Kollerick noticed the similarities between the Calise murder and the earlier Indiana murders. She spoke to police and found that several other young men from the Chicago area had been found stabbed in rural parts of Illinois and Indiana. On September 8th, investigators from Illinois and Indiana met. They agreed that these murders were likely all committed by the same person, who may have killed up to 17 young men. On September 30th, 1983, Larry Eiler was stopped by police in Lowell, Indiana, for a minor traffic violation. He had a young male hitchhiker with him. A police sergeant searched Eiler's pickup truck without his permission and found 2 pieces of nylon rope. Eiler and the hitchhiker were taken to the police station. Eiler was held on suspicion of soliciting a male for sex. Members of the CIM-8 task force arrived to question him. They told him he was a suspect in the highway murders because of an anonymous tip. Eiler answered questions about his life, but refused to talk about his sexuality. He denied any involvement in murder. He agreed to let police look at his truck and said he would take a lie detector test later. Police impounded his silver Ford pickup truck and searched it. They found a knife with blood under the handle, handcuffs, ropes, a hammer, baseball bats, a mallet, and surgical tape. They took plaster casts of his tire treads and the soles of his boots. These casts were later compared to impressions found near where Ralph Calise's body was discovered. The forensic comparison showed that the boot prints from Larry Eiler's truck matched plaster casts taken from the dirt near Ralph Calise's body. The tire tracks also matched. Blood found in Eiler's truck was type A positive, which was Calise's blood type. Based on this evidence, on October 29, 1983, Eiler was formally charged with the murder of Ralph Calise. His bond was set at $1 million. Eiler hired a lawyer who argued the police had violated his rights. The lawyer said the initial search of his truck was illegal because Eiler was only detained for a traffic violation, not arrested for murder. A hearing was held. On February 1, 1984, the judge agreed with the defense. He ruled that the evidence from the truck, the boots, tire casts, and other items could not be used in court because it was obtained improperly. The judge reduced Eiler's bond from $1 million to $10,000. On February 6th, Eiler's family paid the bond, and he was released from jail. He was not allowed to leave Illinois. After his release, Eiler moved to an apartment in the Rogers Park neighborhood of Chicago. Robert Little bought his furniture and paid his rent. Eiler's truck was returned to him in July. On the evening of August 19, 1984, Eiler lured a 16-year-old boy named Daniel Bridges to his apartment. Bridges was a runaway who sometimes worked as a male prostitute. Inside the apartment, Eiler tied Bridges to a chair with a clothesline. He beat him, tortured him with a knife and an ice pick, and then stabbed him to death. After the murder, Eiler dismembered the body in his bathtub using a hacksaw. He drained the blood from the body parts, placed them in plastic bags, and put the bags in a dumpster behind his apartment building. On the morning of August 21st, a building janitor became suspicious of the heavy bags in the dumpster. He pulled one out, and it tore open, revealing a human leg. He called the police. The janitor and other witnesses told police they had seen Larry Eiler putting bags in that dumpster. Police went to Eiler's apartment and arrested him. A search of the apartment revealed a horrific scene. There was blood on the floor, walls, and ceiling of the bedroom, even though someone had tried to clean and paint over it. Bridges's blood was found on a mattress, a chair, a belt, and a sofa. The hacksaw and its blades were found in a drawer. Bridges's jeans and t-shirt, soaked in blood, were found in a closet and a hamper. Eiler's fingerprints were on the plastic bags containing the body parts. Eiler was charged with the murder, kidnapping, and concealment of Daniel Bridges's body. He claimed his fingerprints were on the bags only because he had touched them while throwing out his own trash. He said he did not know what was inside. The case went to trial in July 1986. The prosecution presented the physical evidence: the bloody apartment, the victim's clothes, the hacksaw, and the bags with Eiler's fingerprints. Janitors testified they saw Eiler making multiple trips to the dumpster. John Dobrovolsky's, Eiler's lover, testified that he had called Eiler repeatedly on the night of the murder and that Eiler had acted strangely, telling him not to come over. The defense argued that there was no direct witness to the murder. They suggested that Robert Little, who was at Eiler's apartment earlier that night, could have been responsible. They pointed out that Little had driven back to Terre Haute very early the next morning to pay a property tax bill that wasn't due for 2 months, which could have been an attempt to create an alibi. The jury did not believe the defense. After a short deliberation, they found Larry Eiler guilty of all charges. At a separate hearing to decide his punishment, the prosecutor argued for the death penalty, presenting evidence of Eiler's 1978 stabbing of Craig Long and other violent acts. Eiler's mother and sister pleaded for his life, talking about his difficult childhood. On October 3, 1986, the judge sentenced Larry Eiler to death by lethal injection. The judge called him an evil person who deserved to die for his acts. Eiler was sent to death row at the Pontiac Correctional Center. In 1990, facing a new murder charge in Indiana for the 1982 killing of Stephen Agon, Eiler decided to confess. He pleaded guilty to Agon's murder in exchange for a 60-year prison sentence to be served at the same time as his death sentence. He also testified that Robert Little had helped him commit that murder. Little was tried separately for Agon's murder in 1991, but the jury found him not guilty. Eiler then offered a deal to the state of Illinois. He said he would confess to 20 other murders if they would change his death sentence to life in prison without parole. The authorities, particularly in Cook County, where he was sentenced to death, refused this deal. Larry Eiler died in prison on March 6, 1994, from AIDS-related illnesses. Shortly after his death, his lawyer, Kathleen Zellner, held a press conference. With Eiler's prior permission, she released his detailed confessions to 21 murders. He described how he picked up victims, drugged them, tied them up, and stabbed them. He said he sometimes told them to make peace with God just before killing them. He claimed 4 of the murders, including Stephen Agon's, were done with help from Robert Little. He also insisted that Robert Little was the one who actually murdered Daniel Bridges, though Eiler admitted to dismembering and disposing of the body. Eiler's confessions provided answers and closure for many families whose sons had been found dead or had gone missing in the early 1980s. The police officially linked him to at least 21 murders, though some other cases remain suspected. Robert Little was never charged with any other crime and returned to his teaching job. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office stated that without corroborating evidence, they would not pursue further cases against Little based solely on Eiler's statements. The series of murders, which had terrified communities across the Midwest, was finally solved, and the killer died in prison. Story 4. Gary Michael Heidnik was born on November 22, 1943, in Eastlake, Ohio. This is a small town near Cleveland. His parents were Michael and Ellen Heidnik. He had one younger brother named Terry. When Gary was 3 years old, his parents divorced. This meant his mother and father no longer lived together. After the divorce, Gary and his brother could not stay with their mother. They went to live with their Aunt Carol. They lived with her for 4 years. Then, they went to live with their father. Their father had married a new wife. Gary later said that his father was very strict and cruel. He said his father would hurt him physically. Gary had a problem with wetting his bed. He said his father would humiliate him by making him hang the wet sheets out his bedroom window for the neighbors to see. Gary also claimed his father sometimes held him by his ankles out of a window. Gary's father denied these stories after Gary was arrested. At school, Gary was a lonely child. He did not talk to other students. He would not look people in the eyes. One time, a friendly girl asked him about homework. He yelled at her. He told her she was not good enough to talk to him. Other children made fun of the shape of his head. Gary and his brother said his head was shaped that way because he fell out of a tree when he was young. Even though he was lonely, Gary was very smart in school. Tests showed he had a very high IQ. When Gary was 14, his father sent him to a military school called Staunton Military Academy in Virginia. He stayed there for 2 years but did not graduate. He returned to a normal high school but soon quit. At age 17, he decided to join the United States Army. Gary was in the Army for 13 months. At first, he did very well in basic training. He wanted to be in the military police, but the Army said no. They sent him to Texas to learn how to be a medic. He was good at his medical studies. Then the Army sent him to a hospital in West Germany. While there, he earned his high school diploma. Soon after arriving in Germany, Gary began to feel sick. He had bad headaches, felt dizzy, and was nauseous. Doctors said he had an upset stomach. They also thought he showed signs of mental illness. They gave him medicine for it. In October 1962, the Army moved him to a hospital in Philadelphia. Doctors there said he had a schizoid personality disorder. This meant he had great difficulty forming relationships with other people. Because of this, the Army gave him an honorable discharge. This means he left the military with a good record, but for medical reasons. After leaving the Army, Gary became a licensed practical nurse. He got a job at a veterans hospital. However, he was soon fired. He did not come to work regularly and was rude to the patients. He also tried to go to college but quit after 1 semester. From this time onward, Gary spent many periods in psychiatric hospitals. He tried to kill himself at least 13 different times. In 1970, his mother died by suicide. She had bone cancer and was an alcoholic. His brother Terry also had mental health problems and tried suicide multiple times. In 1971, Gary started his own church. He called it the United Church of the Ministers of God. It started with only 5 people. In 1975, he opened a bank investment account for the church. He put in $1,500. Over the years, he made very good investments. By 1986, the church account was worth over $500,000. This made Gary a wealthy man. Gary wanted to get married. He used a mail-order pen pal service to meet a woman named Betty Disto in the Philippines. They wrote letters for 2 years. He then asked her to marry him. Betty came to the United States in September 1985. They got married in Maryland in October 1985. The marriage quickly became bad. Betty soon found Gary in bed with 3 other women. He often made Betty watch him have sex with other women. Betty said Gary raped and hit her. With help from her community, she left him in January 1986. She was pregnant, but Gary did not know this until later. Gary had children with other women before Betty. He had a son named Gary Jr. with a woman named Gail Linkow. That son was placed in foster care. He also had a daughter named Maxine with a woman named Anjanette Davidson. Anjanette could not read or write and had a developmental disability. Their daughter was also placed in foster care right after birth. In 1978, Gary was arrested. He had taken Anjanette's sister, Alberta, from the hospital where she lived. Alberta also had a developmental disability. He locked her in a storage room in his basement. When she was found, medical checks showed she had been raped. Gary was convicted of kidnapping and rape. He spent 3 years in mental hospitals before a court released him in April 1983. He was supposed to be supervised by a mental health program. After his release in 1983, Gary Heidnik lived alone in a row house at 3520 North Marshall Street in Philadelphia. He managed his church's investment money and lived a quiet life outwardly. In 1985, he married Betty Disto, but she left him in early 1986 after suffering abuse. After Betty left, he was arrested and charged with spousal rape and assault. He was released on bail while awaiting trial for those charges. He was alone in his big house. Heidnik began to frequent areas of the city where people who were poor, or who had drug problems, or who were homeless spent their time. He would drive around in his expensive car. He wanted to find women to bring back to his home. He had a plan to create a kind of family or community by force. On November 25, 1986, he met a 25-year-old woman named Josefina Rivera. She was struggling in life. He offered her a ride. He then took her to his house. Once inside, he took her to the basement. He had dug a square hole in the dirt floor of the basement. It was like a pit. The pit was about 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. He forced Rivera into this pit. He put a heavy lid over it, made from wood and a piece of sheet metal, so she could not get out. Heidnik kept Rivera in the pit. He would take her out only to chain her to a pipe or to a post in the basement. He fed her very little food. He began to sexually assault her repeatedly. He also beat her. He told her she could not leave. He now had his first captive. On December 3, 1986, Heidnik went out again. He found a 24-year-old woman named Sandra Lindsay. He used a similar method, offering a ride or help. He brought her to his basement. He put her into the pit with Rivera. He now had 2 women imprisoned. He chained them by their ankles using thick, heavy chains and padlocks. He continued to assault and beat them both. On December 23, 1986, Heidnik kidnapped a 3rd woman, 19-year-old Lisa Thomas. He put her in the basement. With 3 captives, he kept them all chained to different points in the basement when they were not in the pit. He fed them only small amounts of cheap food like oatmeal, beans, or dog food. He gave them very little water to drink. On January 2, 1987, Heidnik kidnapped a 4th woman, 23-year-old Deborah Dudley. He put her in the basement with the others. The basement was now very crowded. The women were always chained. They were weak, hungry, and injured from the beatings. Heidnik used electric shock to torture them. He had an electrical extension cord. He would strip the wires bare and touch the live wires to their bodies or to the metal chains they were attached to. This caused them severe pain. Sandra Lindsay became very sick from the torture, from hunger, and from an untreated fever. On February 7, 1987, she died in the basement. Heidnik needed to get rid of her body. He took her body upstairs to the kitchen. He used a saw and knives to cut the body apart. He put her arms and legs into his freezer. He wrote the words "dog food" on a bag containing some of the parts. He cooked other parts of her body in his oven and in a pot on the stove. The smell was very bad and strong. Neighbors smelled the terrible odor coming from Heidnik's house. They called the police. Police officers came to the door. Heidnik answered. He told the police he was just cooking a roast and it had burned. The police believed him and left. On January 18, 1987, while he still had 3 captives, Heidnik kidnapped a 5th woman, 18-year-old Jacqueline Askins. He brought her to the basement. He continued to torture all the women. He would wrap duct tape around their mouths. He sometimes stabbed at their ears with a screwdriver to hurt their eardrums. On March 19, 1987, Heidnik forced 3 of the women into the pit. He told Josefina Rivera and another captive to fill the pit with water from a hose. Then he made Rivera help him with the electrical cord. He attached the live wires to the chains of the women in the water-filled pit. Deborah Dudley was electrocuted and died. Heidnik later put her body in the trunk of his car. He drove to a remote forest area in New Jersey called the Pine Barrens. He dug a shallow grave and buried her body there. On March 23, 1987, Heidnik kidnapped a 6th woman, 24-year-old Agnes Adams. He brought her to the house. Now he had 4 living captives, Josefina Rivera, Lisa Thomas, Jacqueline Askins, and Agnes Adams. They were all kept in terrible conditions in the basement. Josefina Rivera saw that Heidnik trusted her a little more because he had forced her to help him. She decided to try to escape. She told Heidnik she needed to visit her family to get money for him. She promised she would come back. On March 24th, 1987, Heidnik agreed. He drove her to a gas station and said he would wait there for her return. Rivera did not go to her family. She went to her boyfriend's house. She first thought about getting a gun and going back to hurt Heidnik, but she decided instead to call the police. When police arrived, they saw the deep marks on her ankle from the chains. They believed her story. Police officers immediately went to the gas station where Heidnik was waiting in his car. They arrested him there. After police arrested Gary Heidnik at the gas station on March 24th, 1987, they took him to the police station for questioning. Other police officers went directly to his house on North Marshall Street. They entered the home and went down into the basement. There, they found the 3 remaining captives, Lisa Thomas, Jacqueline Askins, and Agnes Adams. All the women were still chained. They were rushed to the hospital for treatment. They were suffering from severe malnutrition, infections, and injuries from torture. The basement was a crime scene. Police saw the pit in the floor. They found the chains, padlocks, the electrical cord with stripped wires, and duct tape. In the kitchen and elsewhere in the house, they began to find evidence of the murders. In the freezer, they discovered human limbs. In the oven and in pots, they found human remains. The house was sealed off as a major crime scene. Police also found Heidnik's friend, Cyril Brown. Brown had sometimes visited the house. He was arrested. Brown agreed to cooperate with the police. He told them he had seen Sandra Lindsay die in the basement. He also said he saw Heidnik dismembering her body. Brown was released on bail with the promise that he would testify in court against Heidnik. Josefina Rivera, the woman who escaped, became a key witness for the police. She told them everything that had happened from the day she was kidnapped. She explained about the other victims, the torture, and the 2 murders. She told police that Heidnik had buried Deborah Dudley in New Jersey. Police took Rivera to the Pine Barrens. Using her directions, they dug in the area and found Dudley's body. Heidnik was charged with many crimes. These included 2 counts of first-degree murder for Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley. He was also charged with the kidnapping, rape, and torture of all 6 women. While he was in jail waiting for his trial, Heidnik tried to hang himself in his cell. Guards found him, and he was saved. He was then placed under closer watch. The trial began in 1988. Heidnik's lawyer was Charles Peruto Jr. The lawyer argued that Heidnik was legally insane. This meant that because of mental illness, Heidnik should not be held legally responsible for his crimes. The lawyer described Heidnik's long history of mental hospital stays. The prosecutor, Charles Gallagher, argued that Heidnik was not insane. He said Heidnik knew exactly what he was doing was wrong. To prove this, the prosecutor showed how Heidnik had carefully planned the kidnappings. He also showed how Heidnik had hidden his crimes from neighbors and police. The most powerful evidence against the insanity claim was Heidnik's financial skill. The prosecutor brought in Heidnik's investment advisor from Merrill Lynch. The advisor testified that Heidnik was a very smart investor. Heidnik had turned $1,500 into over $500,000 by making good decisions. The prosecutor said a person who was too mentally ill to understand reality could not do that. The jury listened to all the evidence. They heard from the surviving victims. They saw the photos of the basement and the evidence. On July 1st, 1988, the jury decided Heidnik was guilty of all the charges, including first-degree murder. After the guilty verdict, the trial moved to the penalty phase. The jury had to decide if Heidnik would get the death penalty or life in prison. They again heard about the terrible nature of the crimes. The jury decided that the death penalty was the correct punishment. The judge agreed and sentenced Gary Heidnik to death by lethal injection. Heidnik was sent to the State Correctional Institution at Pittsburgh to await execution. In prison, he tried to kill himself again in 1989 by taking an overdose of his medication. He was treated and survived. His lawyers began a series of appeals. Appeals are when lawyers ask a higher court to review the case to look for legal mistakes. Heidnik's appeals lasted for over 10 years. All of the appeals were eventually rejected by the courts. In 1999, the governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Ridge, signed a death warrant. This set an execution date. Heidnik's daughter and ex-wife filed a last-minute lawsuit. They claimed he was not mentally competent to be executed. A federal court reviewed the case and rejected this claim on July 3, 1999. On July 6, 1999, Gary Heidnik was executed by lethal injection at the State Correctional Institution at Rockview. For his last meal, he requested 2 slices of cheese pizza and a cup of black coffee. After the execution, his body was cremated. He was the last person executed by the state of Pennsylvania. The surviving victims, Josefina Rivera, Lisa Thomas, Jacqueline Askins, and Agnes Adams, returned to their lives. They carried the physical and emotional scars from their ordeal. Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley were buried by their families. The row house on North Marshall Street was eventually torn down. Gary Heidnik's crimes were discovered through the courage of an escaped victim, investigated through physical evidence and witness testimony, and justice was delivered through a trial and execution that concluded over a decade after his arrest. Story 5. Altimio Sanchez was born on January 19, 1958, in San Sebastián, Puerto Rico. Before he was born, his mother tried to end the pregnancy by taking many pills. This did not work, and Sanchez was born. When Sanchez was 2 years old, his mother learned his father was having a relationship with another woman. Because of this, Sanchez's mother decided to leave Puerto Rico. She moved with her young son to the United States. They first lived in Miami, Florida. Later, they moved to a town called North Collins in New York State. Sanchez grew up there with his brother and 2 sisters. A family member, his aunt, later said he was a quiet and serious boy. She also said he was nice. As a teenager, Sanchez went to school like other children. There were no major problems reported from his school years. After finishing school, Sanchez needed a job. He became a factory worker. For many years, he worked at a large plant called the American Brass Company. This factory was in the town of Kenmore, near Buffalo, New York. His job was as a machinist. He often worked the afternoon and night shifts. This meant he finished work very late at night. Sanchez got married to a woman named Kathleen. Together, they had 2 sons. The family lived in a neighborhood called Cleveland Hill in Cheektowaga, New York. To people watching from the outside, Sanchez seemed like a normal family man. He coached his son's basketball team at their school. He also coached their Little League baseball team. He enjoyed activities like playing golf and working in his garden. His neighbors knew him well. He was friendly and charismatic. Some neighbors even called him Uncle Al because he was so likable. Sanchez also took part in community events. One thing he did was register for a running race at the university at Buffalo. This race was called the Linda Yalom Safety Run. It was named in memory of a university student who was killed. At the time, no one knew that Sanchez was connected to that crime. In his personal life, Sanchez had encounters with the police on 2 separate occasions. In 1991, and again in 1999, he was arrested. Both arrests were for the same reason. He was caught trying to pay a woman for sex. One time, the woman was actually an undercover police officer. Sanchez paid her $25. For this crime, he went to court and had to pay a fine of $75. After paying the fine, he was released. For many years, Altimio Sanchez committed violent attacks against women. His first known attacks were rapes. He would approach women in secluded areas, often near parks or paths. He used a rope or a cord to strangle the women during these assaults. This method of attack made the victims unable to scream or fight back effectively. Several of the women fought hard against him, but he was stronger. These rapes happened in the 1970s and 1980s. The victims were of different ages, some as young as 14. Sanchez did not know these women. He chose them because they were alone in quiet places. On September 29, 1990, Sanchez attacked a university student named Linda Yalom. Linda was 22 years old. She was a student at the university at Buffalo. She was training for a marathon and was running on the Ellicott Creek bike path. Sanchez attacked her there. He raped her. He then used a cord to strangle her to death. He left her body on the path. The police from the town of Amherst investigated this murder. They found physical evidence at the scene, including DNA from the attacker. At the time, they did not know who the DNA belonged to. 2 years later, in November of 1992, Sanchez killed again. This victim was a woman named Majane Mazer. She was 31 years old. Majane Mazer was a sex worker. Sanchez met her in downtown Buffalo. He took her to a secluded area near some railroad tracks. There, he killed her. The police in Buffalo City investigated this murder. They did not immediately connect it to the death of Linda Yalom. During this time, police scientists were studying the DNA evidence from the Linda Yalom crime scene. By 1992, they had used this DNA to connect the same attacker to several other rapes in the area. They now knew one man was responsible for attacking at least 6 different women, including Linda Yalom. The police gave this unknown man a nickname. They called him the bike path rapist because many attacks happened near paths. The police had his DNA, but they did not have his name or face. They did not know it was Altemio Sanchez. Sanchez continued his normal life. He worked his factory job, coached his son's sports teams, and lived with his family. He also continued to attack women. His method changed slightly over the years. He began to use a different tool for strangulation. He started using a thin wire or a garrote, which is a cord pulled tight with handles. This tool could kill very quickly. His last known murder happened on September 29, 2006. The date was exactly 16 years after he killed Linda Yalom. The victim was Joan Diver. She was 45 years old, a nurse, a wife, and a mother of 4 children. Joan Diver was out for a walk on a bike path in the town of Newstead. Sanchez attacked her on the path. He used his garrote to strangle her. She died from the strangulation. Evidence showed that he did not rape her. It is believed she died before he could assault her. Her body was found 2 days later. The murder of Joan Diver caused great fear in the community. Because this murder was similar to the old bike path rapist cases, the police decided to form a special group. This group was called the Bike Path Task Force. It included police from different towns, county sheriffs, state police, and the FBI. Their job was to find the killer. They looked again at all the old cases and the DNA evidence. They knew the same man had killed Linda Yalom and Joan Diver. They also strongly suspected he had killed Majane Mazer. They now called the unknown man the bike path killer. The police on the task force had one major clue: the killer's DNA. They knew from the DNA that the killer was likely a man of Hispanic descent. An FBI profiler also suggested that the killer probably used the services of sex workers. The police began to look for a man who fit this very general description. They did not yet know they were looking for Altemio Sanchez. The Bike Path Task Force worked to find the man whose DNA matched the crimes. They began looking at men who had been arrested for crimes involving women, like soliciting sex workers. This was because the FBI profile suggested the killer used such services. In their search, they found police records from 1991 and 1999 for a man named Altemio Sanchez. He had been arrested for trying to pay for sex. This made him a person of interest to the task force. The police started to watch Sanchez secretly. They followed him to see what he did and where he went. On January 13, 2007, Sanchez went to a restaurant in Amherst named Soul. After he finished his meal and left, the police went into the restaurant. They collected the utensils, glass, and napkin that Sanchez had used. They took these items to a forensic lab. Scientists tested the items for DNA. The DNA from the restaurant items was compared to the DNA from the old crime scenes. It was a match. The DNA from Sanchez's glass and napkin was the same as the DNA from the killer who had murdered Linda Yalom and Joan Diver. With this proof, the police could arrest him. On January 15, 2007, members of the task force went to Altemio Sanchez's home in Cheektowaga. They placed him under arrest. He was charged with the murders of Linda Yalom, Majane Mazer, and Joan Diver. On January 19th, a grand jury formally indicted him for the murders of Yalom and Mazer. While in jail, Sanchez was questioned by prosecutors. He later decided to plead guilty. On May 17, 2007, in a courtroom, Sanchez admitted to the 3 murders. He spoke quietly and cried as he confessed to killing Linda Yalom, Majane Mazer, and Joan Diver. His lawyer said Sanchez had a difficult childhood and held deep anger toward women, but the lawyer stated this was not an excuse for the crimes. Because of his guilty plea, there was no trial. On August 15, 2007, a judge sentenced Altemio Sanchez. The sentence was 75 years to life in prison. This meant he would not be eligible for parole for 75 years. He was sent to a prison called Clinton Correctional Facility. Prison is where he would spend the rest of his life. The arrest of Sanchez also solved another old problem. A man named Anthony Capozzi had been in prison since 1985. He was convicted for 2 rapes that happened near bike paths. Capozzi had schizophrenia and always said he was innocent. After Sanchez was arrested, police saw the attacks Capozzi was convicted of were very similar to the bike path killer's methods. They also realized Sanchez and Capozzi looked somewhat alike. Police then tested the old DNA evidence from those 2 rape cases. The DNA matched Sanchez, not Capozzi. This proved Anthony Capozzi was innocent. He was released from prison in March 2007 after 22 years. He later received millions of dollars from the state for his wrongful conviction. Altemio Sanchez served his prison sentence for 16 years. On September 22, 2023, prison guards found him in his cell. He was not moving. He had a cut on his arm that he had made himself. Prison staff took him to a nearby hospital, where doctors pronounced him dead. He was 65 years old. His death was ruled a suicide. The crimes he committed left lasting pain for the families of the victims and the women who survived his attacks. The case was finally closed. Story 6. Lorenzo Jerome Gilliard Jr. was born on May 24, 1950, in Kansas City, Missouri. He was one of 5 children in his family. His father was Lorenzo Gilliard Sr., and his mother was Laura Brown. From a very young age, Lorenzo was known for his aggressive behavior. He was bigger than most children his age. He used his size to bully and hit smaller children at school. This made other children afraid of him. As he got older, his behavior caused problems in school. He did not like to follow rules. He often skipped school, and his grades were very poor. Because of this, he was forced to leave school after the 10th grade. He did not graduate. In the mid-1960s, as a teenager, he met a young woman named Rena Hill. They began a relationship. Rena Hill became pregnant. Because of the pregnancy, Lorenzo Gilliard and Rena Hill got married on November 20th, 1968. After the marriage, Gilliard started to get into trouble with the law. His behavior towards women became problematic. In January 1969, he was arrested. He was accused of attacking and raping a girl he knew. The case did not go to trial. The victim agreed to drop the charges after Gilliard said he was sorry. He was released. In 1970, Gilliard's own father was found guilty of rape. 2 years later, in 1972, Gilliard was arrested again for rape. The woman said he choked her until she passed out. She picked him out of a police lineup. However, the charges were later dropped. The authorities at the time did not find her testimony strong enough. Gilliard's marriage was violent. In 1973, his wife, Rena Hill, told the police that he had been physically and sexually abusive for years. He was arrested for assaulting her. The result was that he had to pay a fine and was ordered to divorce his wife. In February 1974, he was arrested for raping a 25-year-old dancer. The woman identified him from a photo. Again, the charges were dropped when an agreement was made between them. 5 months later, in July 1974, he was arrested for a more serious crime. He was accused of raping the 13-year-old daughter of a friend. This happened near the Missouri River. The young girl changed her story about the rape. Because of this, the rape charges were dropped. However, Gilliard was found guilty of a lesser crime, sexual acts with a minor. For this, he was sentenced to 9 months in the Jackson County Jail. After he got out of jail, Gilliard married a second time. This marriage did not last. His second wife soon left him. She filed for divorce. She said, like his first wife, that Gilliard beat her and sexually abused her. In the late 1970s, Gilliard married for a third time. In 1979, Gilliard was arrested for a violent attack on a young couple. He was accused of raping the young woman and threatening to kill her boyfriend. Both victims identified him as their attacker. His trial happened in September 1980. A jury found him not guilty. They said there was not enough evidence to convict him. A few months after this trial, he was arrested for attacking his third wife. For this, he only received a fine and another divorce. In February 1981, Gilliard attacked his ex-wife on 2 different days. First, he hit her so hard that her front teeth were knocked out. Later, he stabbed her in the hand with an ice pick. He was arrested for this assault. The court gave him a suspended sentence and probation. This meant he would not go to jail if he stayed out of trouble. In November 1981, Gilliard was arrested for theft. He was released after paying bail. In the spring of 1982, he broke the rules of his probation. For this violation, a judge sent him to prison for 4 years. While he was in prison, his sister, Patricia Dixon, was also convicted of a crime. She was a prostitute and was found guilty of killing a client in 1983. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Gilliard was let out of prison on parole on January 10, 1983. He did not stay out for long. He was soon arrested in Wyandotte County, Kansas, for making threats about having a bomb. He was sent back to prison. He was released again in late 1985. In January 1986, Gilliard got a job. He worked as a garbage collector for the Deffenbaugh Disposal Service. His father already worked there in the maintenance department. This was a stable job. On December 23, 1987, the police questioned Gilliard. They considered him a possible suspect in the murder of a woman named Sheila Ingold. The police took a sample of his blood during this questioning. They did not have enough evidence to charge him, so they let him go. In 1991, Gilliard married for a 4th time. At his job, he was promoted. He became a supervisor. This meant he was in charge of several garbage collection teams in different parts of Kansas City. In July 1996, a female neighbor went to the police. She said Gilliard had been sexually harassing her for almost a year. The police did not charge him with a crime. The woman soon moved away from the neighborhood. People who knew Gilliard in his later life, like friends and co-workers, spoke well of him. They did not see the person from his past. After his promotion at the garbage company, Lorenzo Gilliard had a steady job and a clean reputation with those around him. However, during the same period, a series of violent deaths occurred in Kansas City. The victims were all women. The police did not immediately know these crimes were connected. The first known victim was Stacy Swafford. She was 17 years old. She was last seen alive on April 10, 1977. She was new to Kansas City and did not have a home. She traded sex for money. 1 week after she was last seen, her body was found in an empty lot. She had been killed by suffocation. On January 23, 1980, the body of 15-year-old Gwendolyn Kazine was discovered. She had been reported missing by her father the day before. She was found with wire wrapped very tightly around her neck and her wrists. She was also involved in prostitution. She had last seen her parents a week before her body was found. Margaret Miller, aged 17, was found on May 9, 1982. She had been strangled. Like the others, she was a sex worker. On March 14, 1986, a woman named Catherine Berry was found. She was 34 years old. Her body was inside an abandoned building. A nylon stocking was tied tightly around her neck. Catherine Berry had mental health problems. She was not a prostitute, but often spent time with homeless people. Naomi Kelly was 23 years old. Her body was found in a park on August 16, 1986. She was a student and a single mother of 2 children. Police learned she sometimes worked as a prostitute to pay her bills. She had been strangled with a towel. The towel was left near her body. Deborah Blevins was 32. Her body was found on November 27, 1986. She was completely naked and had been left in some bushes next to a church. She had been strangled. And Barnes, 36, was found on April 17, 1987, near the city center. She was an exotic dancer and a prostitute. She had been strangled. Kelly Ford was 20 years old. Her body was found on June 9, 1987. It was left at the edge of a cliff near a park. She was almost naked. She was a drug addict and a sex worker. She had been strangled. Angela Mayhew was 19. She was found on September 12, 1987, on the side of a road. She was fully dressed, which was different from the others. She was a prostitute, but doctors found no signs of sexual assault. She had been strangled. Sheila Ingold was 36. Her body was discovered on November 3, 1987, inside an abandoned van near an auto shop. She was a prostitute. She had been strangled. 2 rings she owned were missing from her body. Around this time, police questioned a garbage worker named Lorenzo Gilliard because he had shown interest in buying that same van. They took a sample of his blood, but did not have enough proof to hold him. Carmeline Hibbs was 30 years old. Her body was found on December 19, 1987, in an apartment building parking lot. She was partially nude. She had been strangled. The last known victim was Connie Luther. She was 29. Her body was found on January 11, 1993, in a pile of snow. A noose made from shoelaces was around her neck. She was a prostitute. During these years, the police found the bodies of these women in different places. The bodies were found in landfills, empty buildings, parks, and parking lots. Most of the women were naked or partly naked. Almost all had been sexually assaulted. They had all been strangled. Items like stockings, wire, towels, and laces were used to kill them. In many cases, the victims' shoes were missing. The police did not connect all these murders at first. They worked on each case separately. In 1994, forensic tests finally linked 2 of the murders together. This showed one person might be responsible for more than one killing. However, the police did not have a clear suspect for several more years. For many years, the murders of the women in Kansas City remained unsolved. The police had many separate cases, but could not find the person responsible. This changed in 2001. In that year, The Kansas City Police Department received a large amount of money from the federal government. This money was a special grant. Its purpose was to use new DNA technology to look at old, unsolved cases, which are called cold cases. A team of investigators began to re-examine the evidence from the murders of the women who had been strangled. They had a blood sample that had been taken from Lorenzo Gilliard back in December 1987, when he was questioned about Sheila Ingold's murder. The sample had been kept in storage. Using the new, more powerful DNA tests, the scientists compared Gilliard's DNA to DNA evidence collected from the crime scenes. The test results provided a clear match. Lorenzo Gilliard's DNA was found on multiple victims. This scientific evidence conclusively connected him to the murders of 6 women: Catherine Barry, Naomi Kelly and Barnes, Kelly Ford, Sheila Ingold, and Carmeline Hibbs. The DNA showed he had sexual contact with them around the time they were killed. Based on this evidence and the similar circumstances of the other deaths, police also strongly believed he was responsible for the murders of at least 6 more women. With this proof, the police moved to arrest him. On April 16, 2004, Lorenzo Gilliard was arrested at his home. He was charged with 12 counts of first-degree murder. He was a grandfather and a respected supervisor at his job at the time, so his arrest shocked people who knew him later in life. The legal process took time. In January 2007, Gilliard's lawyers made a deal with the prosecutors. The prosecutors agreed not to ask for the death penalty. In return, Gilliard agreed to have a trial without a jury. This is called a bench trial. A single judge would hear the evidence and decide if he was guilty or not guilty. The trial began on March 5, 2007. At the trial, the prosecution's case was built almost entirely on the DNA evidence. Forensic experts explained to the judge how the DNA from Gilliard was found on the victims. The prosecutor, Jim Kanatsar, also described the patterns that linked the crimes. He noted all the women were strangled, left in hidden places, and were missing their shoes. Throughout the trial, Gilliard said he was innocent. He claimed he had never met any of the victims. While the trial was being prepared, more DNA testing was done. On June 23, 2006, because of these new test results, Gilliard was charged with a 13th murder. The victim was Helga Kruger, a 26-year-old woman found strangled with a towel in February 1989. This charge was added to the case. On March 16, 2007, the judge announced the verdict. Lorenzo Gilliard was found guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Barry, Kelly, Barnes, Ford, Ingold, and Hibbs. The judge found him not guilty of killing Angela Mayhew because the DNA evidence in her case was not strong enough. The charges for the other murders, including Helga Kruger's, were not part of this trial but remained linked to him by evidence. For his convictions, the sentence was life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never be released. He was first sent to the Western Missouri Correctional Center. In July 2019, he was moved to the Crossroads Correctional Center, where he remains. In 2018, a British journalist named Piers Morgan interviewed Gilliard in prison. During the interview, Gilliard continued to insist he was an innocent man. He said he did not know any of the women he was convicted of killing. The families of the victims and the law enforcement officials who worked on the case know the DNA evidence proves his guilt. Lorenzo Gilliard will spend the rest of his life in prison for his crimes. Story 7. Joseph Edward Duncan III was born on February 25, 1963, at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. His father was in the United States Army. Because of his father's job, the family moved very often. They lived in many different cities in the United States and in other countries. They rarely lived in one place for more than a year or two. This meant Joseph Duncan changed schools and friends frequently as a child. When Joseph Duncan was about 12 years old, his father retired from the military. The family then settled in Tacoma, Washington. He was the fourth of 5 children. He had 3 older sisters and 1 younger brother. His mother was described as a very controlling and strict woman. His parents' marriage was not happy. They separated in 1979 and legally divorced in 1983. After the separation, the 3 sisters soon moved out of the family home. Duncan stayed living with his mother. His younger brother eventually went to live with their father. Duncan attended Lakes High School in Tacoma. He did not finish his studies or graduate. His early behavior showed serious problems. His first known violent crime happened in 1978, when he was 15 years old. He used a gun to force a 9-year-old boy to submit, and he raped him. The following year, in 1979, he was arrested for driving a car that was stolen. Because of these crimes, he was sent to a juvenile facility called the Jesse Dislin Boys Ranch. At this facility, Duncan spoke with a therapist. He told the therapist that he had tied up and sexually assaulted at least 6 young boys. He estimated that by the age of 16, he had raped 13 younger boys. This showed a deep and established pattern of violent sexual behavior towards children from a very young age. In 1980, when he was still a teenager, Duncan committed another violent crime. He stole several guns from a neighbor. He then used one of these guns to abduct a 14-year-old boy from the street. He took the boy to a secluded area and raped him at gunpoint. For this crime, he was tried as an adult. He was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He served 14 years of that sentence. He was released on parole in 1994. After his release, Duncan lived in the Seattle area in Washington state. He was on parole, which meant he had to follow strict rules and report to a parole officer. In 1996, he was arrested again for using marijuana. This was a violation of his parole rules. He was released after a few weeks with new, even stricter rules to follow. He was still on parole during this time. In 1997, Duncan violated his parole rules again. The exact reason for this violation is part of the official record from that time. Because of this violation, he was arrested in Missouri and sent back to prison. He remained in prison until July 14, 2000. He was released early for good behavior. After his release, he moved to Fargo, North Dakota. In March of 2005, Duncan was charged with a new crime. The charge was for molesting 2 young boys at a playground in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. This crime had happened in July of 2004. On April 5, 2005, he went to court for this charge. A judge set his bail at $15,000. A man from Fargo, who knew Duncan, helped him pay the bail money. Duncan was released from jail while waiting for his trial. However, Duncan did not stay for his trial. He left the area and disappeared. On June 1, 2005, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest for running away. After skipping bail in Minnesota, Joseph Duncan drove west. He was a fugitive, wanted for the molestation charges, and now for fleeing from justice. On May 15, 2005, he arrived near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He saw a house that seemed isolated, located next to a lake. Inside the home were 40-year-old Brenda Gruen, her 37-year-old boyfriend Mark McKenzie, and 3 of Brenda's children, 13-year-old Slade, 9-year-old Dylan, and 8-year-old Shasta. Duncan decided to enter the house. In the early morning hours of May 16th, he put on black gloves, took a hammer, and broke in. He was armed with a gun. He went to the room where Dylan and Shasta were sleeping. Brenda heard the noise and came to the children's room. Duncan forced everyone into the living room. He used plastic zip ties to bind the hands of Brenda, Mark, and Slade behind their backs. Duncan then took the 2 youngest children, Shasta and Dylan, outside and left them on the lawn. He went back inside the house. Shasta, from outside, heard loud thumping noises coming from inside. She then saw her older brother Slade come out of the house, injured and stumbling. Duncan followed him out. Duncan then used the hammer to kill all 3 adults and Slade. The cause of death for each was blunt force trauma to the head. After committing the murders, Duncan put Shasta and Dylan into his vehicle, a red Jeep Cherokee he had stolen earlier. He drove away with them. He took them to a remote, wooded campsite in Montana, within the Lolo National Forest. At this campsite, he repeatedly sexually assaulted and tortured both children over several weeks. He kept them captive, moving between 2 different campsites in the area. During this time, Duncan told Shasta that he had killed her mother, her brother Slade, and Mark with a hammer. The children were forced to rely on him for food and water. They were completely under his control and were subjected to ongoing abuse. On July 1, 2005, Duncan killed Dylan Gruen at the campsite. The events leading to the murder began when Duncan was looking for a beer in a plastic storage box. Inside the same box was a sawed-off shotgun. According to what Duncan later told Shasta, the shotgun fired accidentally while he was digging in the box. The blast hit Dylan in the stomach. The boy was badly wounded and screaming in pain. Duncan then took the shotgun. He placed the barrel against Dylan's head and pulled the trigger, but the gun did not fire. He reloaded the weapon. Dylan begged him not to do it. Duncan put the shotgun to the boy's head a second time and fired, killing him instantly. Duncan later told Shasta he did it to end Dylan's suffering. After killing Dylan, Duncan burned the boy's body at the campsite. After Dylan's murder, Duncan focused his attention on Shasta. A few days later, he told her he was going to kill her too. He gave her a choice, to be strangled or to be shot. Shasta chose strangulation. Duncan wrapped a rope around her neck and began to tighten it. As she was losing consciousness, she managed to speak. She used the nickname Jet that Duncan had told her to call him. She begged him to stop. He released the rope and did not kill her. Instead, Duncan decided to drive back towards Coeur d'Alene, Idaho with Shasta. In the early morning of July 2nd, they stopped at a Denny's restaurant. Shasta was dirty, with unwashed hair, and was wearing only a black dress. She was with Duncan, who was unkempt. A waitress and a manager in the restaurant saw them. They thought the young girl looked familiar from news reports about the missing Gruen children. They quietly called the police. To prevent Duncan from leaving, the restaurant manager turned up the music and a customer blocked the door. Police officers arrived at the restaurant. They approached the booth where Duncan and Shasta were sitting. They arrested Duncan without a struggle. Shasta immediately identified herself to the officers. She was rescued and taken to a hospital to be checked and to be reunited with her father. Duncan was taken to jail on kidnapping charges and for his existing federal warrant for fleeing. During conversations with Shasta while she was captive, Duncan had talked about other crimes. He told her he had killed a young boy in California years earlier. He also confessed to killing 2 young sisters in Seattle. These were crimes the police had not yet connected to him. Following Joseph Duncan's arrest at the Denny's restaurant, a large and complex investigation began. The first priority was to find Dylan Gruen. Based on information from Shasta and from a gas station employee in Kellogg, Idaho, who recognized them from surveillance video, police focused their search on a remote area of western Montana. On July 4, 2005, investigators found a makeshift campsite in the Lolo National Forest near St. Regis, Montana. At the site, they discovered human remains that were later confirmed through DNA testing to be those of Dylan Gruen. The evidence at the scene showed he had been shot. Duncan's arrest also prompted law enforcement across the country to review unsolved cases involving children. People on the internet began comparing Duncan's photo to an old composite sketch from the 1997 kidnapping and murder of 10-year-old Anthony Martinez in Riverside County, California. They noticed a strong resemblance. This information was sent to the FBI. Investigators in California had a partial fingerprint taken from duct tape used on Anthony Martinez's body. They compared this fingerprint to Duncan's fingerprints, which were now on file after his arrest in Idaho. The fingerprints matched. In August 2005, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department officially named Duncan as the person who killed Anthony Martinez. Duncan had already confessed to this murder during an FBI interview in July. Furthermore, during her police interviews, Shasta Gruen told investigators that Duncan had spoken to her about killing 2 young girls in Seattle. This matched the unsolved 1996 murders of Samieja White, age 11, and her half-sister Carmen Cubayas, age 9. Duncan later confessed to beating these 2 girls to death. With these confessions and the physical evidence, authorities closed these cold cases. Joseph Duncan was prosecuted in 3 different courts. First, in an Idaho state court, he was charged with the murders of Brenda Gruen, Slade Gruen, and Mark McKenzie. In October 2006, he pleaded guilty to these murders and to kidnapping the victims. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences without parole. He agreed to help detectives by providing passwords to encrypted files on his computer. Second, he faced federal charges in a U.S. District Court for the crimes against Shasta and Dylan Gruen. These charges included kidnapping children across state lines and murder. In December 2007, he pleaded guilty to all 10 federal charges against him. A jury then decided his punishment. In August 2008, after seeing horrific evidence, including a video Duncan made of himself torturing Dylan, the jury recommended the death penalty. The judge sentenced Duncan to death for the murder of Dylan Gruen and to additional life sentences for the crimes against Shasta. Third, he was charged in a California state court for the murder of Anthony Martinez. In 2011, he pleaded guilty as part of a deal. The district attorney explained that the victim's family wanted closure and that Duncan was already on federal death row. He was sentenced to 2 more life sentences without the possibility of parole. Duncan was sent to federal death row at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He attempted to represent himself during some appeals, but courts eventually ruled he was mentally competent when he waived his right to challenge his death sentence. In prison, he maintained a blog through letters sent to an outside contact, writing about his life on death row. In October 2020, Duncan was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor called glioblastoma. He refused all treatment, including chemotherapy. Medical staff estimated he had less than a year to live. Joseph Edward Duncan III died in prison on March 28, 2021, at the age of 58, before the federal government could carry out his execution. His death brought a definitive end to the legal saga of a violent criminal whose actions caused immeasurable suffering to multiple families. Story 8. Sean Michael Great was born on August 8, 1976, in Marion, Ohio. His parents were Terry Great and Teresa McFarland. For the first few years, his life was normal. He played softball and football in the backyard with other children from the neighborhood. He was a friendly child who got along with others. His parents divorced 2 days before his 6th birthday. After the divorce, Sean lived with his mother. When Sean was 11 years old, his mother left Ohio. She moved to Kentucky to live with a man. Sean was very upset that his mother left. He did not like his mother's boyfriends. After his mother left, Sean went to live with his father, Terry Great. He lived with his father for the next 4 years. Sean attended River Valley High School. In school, he had many problems. He was held back in kindergarten and again in 1st grade. Even though he struggled, people found him charming. A former friend said all the girls liked Sean. He played baseball for the school team and was good at it. He stopped playing after he broke his arm. The break required surgery because a tumor was found in his arm. At home, there were difficulties. His half-sister later said there was a battle between Sean and his mother from a young age. A court psychiatrist would later say Sean was a depressed kid. The psychiatrist said this depression came from neglect and emotional detachment in childhood. A high school girlfriend said Sean would sometimes lie on the couch for days without moving. Then he would go back to acting normal. Legal custody of Sean and his brother was officially given to their father in June 1994. Later that same year, in November, Sean was arrested. He was arrested for grabbing his girlfriend by the throat. He graduated from high school in 1995. In October 1996, when Sean was 20 years old, he broke into a house. He had a younger accomplice with him. They went into the house to steal jewelry and money. In January 1997, Sean was charged with felony burglary for this crime. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He was released early, in October 1997. After his release from prison in 1997, Sean Great lived in Ohio. He moved between different cities and often stayed in empty houses. He met women who were in difficult situations. Many of them were struggling with addiction or homelessness. In 2006, Great met a woman named Dana. Dana was 23 years old and from Louisiana. She was separated from her husband and had 2 young daughters. Great spent time with Dana in Marion, Ohio. One day they argued. During the argument, Great strangled Dana with his hands. He killed her. After she was dead, he left her body in a wooded area in Marion County. Her body was found in 2007, but the police did not know who she was or who killed her. Nearly 10 years later, in March 2015, Great was in a relationship with a woman named Rebecca Leacy. They argued over $4. Great believed Rebecca had stolen $4 from him at his workplace. During this argument, Great strangled Rebecca with his hands. He killed her. He then left her body in a house in Richland County. The police found her body and originally thought she died from a drug overdose. In June 2016, Great was in an on-and-off relationship with a woman named Candace Cunningham. They had known each other for 5 years. Candace was 29 years old. Great later told police that Candace was a problem. He took her to a vacant, burned-down house in Richland County. He kept her there for about 3 days. During this time, he hurt her. After 3 days, Great strangled Candace with his hands. He killed her. He left her body behind the burned house. In September 2016, Great met a woman named Stacy Stanley. Stacy was also known as Stacy Hicks. Great took Stacy to an empty house at 363 Covert Court in Ashland, Ohio. He strangled her with an electrical cord. He killed her. He left her body in the upstairs bedroom of that house. Around the same time, Great met a woman named Elizabeth Griffith. He also took Elizabeth to the same empty house on Covert Court. He strangled her with his hands. He killed her. He left her body in the basement of that house. Also in September 2016, Great spent time with a 38-year-old woman he knew from the Salvation Army in Ashland. They were friends and would talk about the Bible. On September 11th, Great asked this woman to walk with him to the house on Covert Court. He said he had some clothes there to give her. Once inside, the woman sat on a bed and read a Bible. Great came back into the room and his mood changed. He took the Bible from her hands. He told her she was not going anywhere. The woman tried to fight back. Great then beat her and strangled her until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, he had tied her to the bed with cords. He kept her tied up in the house for 3 days. During these 3 days, he sexually assaulted her many times. He also shaved a heart shape into her pubic hair. He threatened to kill her. He told her he had already killed other women and pointed to the floor, saying bodies were buried there. The woman was bleeding and had bruises over her body. While the woman was tied up, Great used her debit card. He went out to buy food and alcohol. He also used her phone. On the morning of September 13th, Great was asleep in the house. The woman was still tied up, but she was able to reach a cell phone. She called 911 and whispered for help. The police arrived at the house while Great was still sleeping. They entered the house, rescued the woman, and arrested Great. When the police searched the house, they found the bodies of Stacy Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith. The 911 call made by the woman from the house on Covert Court was received by Ashland Police dispatchers on the morning of September 13, 2016. Police officers were sent to the address immediately. They entered the house and found the woman tied to a bed. They freed her and took her to a hospital for treatment. In another room, they found Sean Great asleep and arrested him without a struggle. While securing the house, police officers discovered the body of Stacy Stanley upstairs. They then found the body of Elizabeth Griffith in the basement. The house became an active crime scene. Police detectives began questioning Great. During these interviews, Great confessed to killing Stanley and Griffith. He also told the police about other killings. Based on Great's information, police in Richland County went to the site of a burned-down house. There, behind the house, they found the body of Candace Cunningham. Police also reopened the investigation into the death of Rebecca Leacy. Her body was found in March 2015, but her death had been incorrectly ruled an overdose. After Great's confession, authorities re-examined the case as a homicide. In Marion County, police reviewed the case of an unidentified woman found dead in 2007. Great had confessed to killing a woman named Dana in 2006. Forensic experts used isotope testing on the unidentified woman's remains. This testing suggested she was likely from the southern United States. Later, the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit group, used genetic genealogy. In June 2019, they identified the remains as those of Dana Nicole Lowry. Great was first charged in Ashland County for the murders of Stacy Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith, and for the kidnapping and assault of the surviving woman. A grand jury indicted him on 23 counts. The prosecutor announced he would seek the death penalty because of the nature of the crimes. Great's lawyers initially entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation found that Great was not insane at the time of the crimes. His lawyers then withdrew the insanity plea. Before his trial, Great gave detailed interviews about the murders to 2 news reporters. Because of this, the prosecution and defense lawyers together asked the judge for a gag order. The judge agreed, preventing Great from speaking further to the media. Great's trial for the Ashland County murders began in April 2018. During the trial, he changed his plea and pleaded guilty to 15 of the charges against him, including kidnapping and assault. However, he did not plead guilty to the murder charges of Stanley and Griffith. A jury was tasked with deciding those charges. In May 2018, the jury found him guilty of the aggravated murder of both women. In June 2018, he was formally sentenced to death by a judge. In March 2019, Great appeared in a Richland County court. He pleaded guilty to the murders of Rebecca Leacy and Candace Cunningham. For these crimes, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In September 2019, Great appeared in a Marion County court. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Dana Nicole Lowry. For this crime, he was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Great appealed his death sentence from the Ashland County case to the Ohio Supreme Court. In December 2020, the court upheld the death sentence. He remains on death row in Ohio. The state has not carried out an execution since 2018, and his execution date is pending due to ongoing legal appeals. The woman he assaulted, known as Jane Doe, survived and testified against him. The city of Ashland later demolished the house at 363 Covert Court where the crimes occurred. Sean Great will spend the rest of his life in prison, awaiting execution for his crimes.